They drained my lake. Not polluted, not artificial. A spring-fed, crystal-clear lake that had existed for generations gone. They said it was a flood risk. Then they paved over it. They covered paradise with asphalt. I warned them. I begged them. I showed them maps, models, data. But they didn't care. Because Victoria Harlow, the 28-year-old HOA president with a God complex and a Pinterest obsession, decided my sanctuary was unproductive land. And I'm Arthur Jenkins. I'm 38. A civil engineer. My specialty, hydrology. The science of water. And water, unlike people, doesn't lie. Water always finds a way. Now the very ground beneath their fancy homes is turning against them. Nature remembers what they tried to forget. You're about to watch how I turned a lake into a legend. And why this HOA Karen should have listened. I first saw the lake 10 years ago. 5 serene acres at the edge of Willow Creek Estates, quiet, untouched, and pulsing with life. The lake wasn't massive, but it was deep, spring-fed, crystal clear. Fish shimmered just beneath the surface. Herons glided overhead. Old oaks bent toward the water like guardians. I wasn't looking for luxury. I wanted peace, solitude. That lake gave it to me. I swam in it during summer, fished in the fall, watched sunsets that turned the water orange and gold. It was my sanctuary. No lawnmowers, no pool parties, just frogs, birdsong, and the wind. The man who sold it to me had lived there 50 years, said the lake had always been there. Always. I believed him, because the water felt permanent, like it belonged. Back then I didn't know who Victoria Harlow was, but she would come to hate that lake and try to erase it. Victoria Harlow arrived like a thunderstorm in heels. At 28, freshly appointed HOA president, she treated Willow Creek Estates like her private kingdom. With a clipboard in one hand and a Starbucks in the other, she patrolled the streets daily, scanning lawns, measuring mailbox height, documenting Christmas lights left up past January. She was meticulous, relentless, and obsessed with symmetry. I wasn't even part of the HOA. My property bordered theirs, technically outside their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her. She sent me letters, friendly reminders about fence aesthetics, the unsightly vegetation by the lake, even the sound of frogs at night. I responded politely, legally. I knew my rights, but Victoria wasn't interested in law. She wanted control. To her, my land was chaos, wild, natural, alive. To me, it was sacred. And somewhere between our worlds, the war began. Silent at first, but ready to explode. It started as these things often do, with something small. A neatly folded letter taped to my gate, written in language so polite it felt like a threat wrapped in perfume. Concerned neighbors have noted excessive milkweed growth near the HOA border. Milkweed. I was cultivating it for monarch butterflies, a small conservation effort of mine. But to Victoria, it was unsightly, non-conforming, a risk to property values. I replied with documentation from the state's environmental department and a smile. She didn't respond. But days later, someone anonymously reported me for improper compost practices. Then came the complaints about frogs. Literal, frogs croaking too loudly at night. Each accusation was petty but persistent. Each one chipped away at the peace I had built. She wasn't just pushing rules, she was testing boundaries. And I realized then Victoria Harlow didn't want compliance. She wanted conquest. And I had just become her campaign. For months, the skirmishes continued, silent letters, vague threats, and a steady stream of complaints masked as concern. But the truth finally surfaced during a late-night phone call from Mrs. Evelyn Greaves, a soft-spoken widow who lived 3 houses down. She whispered like she feared the wind might carry her words. "They're eyeing your lake," she said. "They want to turn it into a community parking lot." At first, I laughed because the idea was absurd, paving over a natural spring-fed ecosystem for SUVs. But then I saw it. Victoria, hosting town meetings in manicured cul-de-sacs showing shiny renderings of Willow Creek Commons, curved driveways, brick pavers, decorative lampposts, and, where my lake had been, a blacktop plaza with painted lines and carports. She called it a much-needed solution to overflow parking. To me, it was desecration. She wasn't just reshaping the neighborhood, she was erasing everything that didn't fit her vision. The official letter came in a thick envelope embossed self-important and soaked in condescension. Inside was an engineering report commissioned by the HOA signed by a firm I had never heard of. Its conclusion: my lake, my tranquil, self-regulating, century-old lake, was now classified as a flood hazard. According to their so-called experts, it posed a significant risk to neighboring properties in extreme weather events. I read it once, then again. It was riddled with flawed data, exaggerated scenarios, and laughable hydrological logic. They used satellite images taken after a rare storm to show swelling and cited irregular retention patterns. It was pure fiction. But I knew what it really was a weapon dressed as a warning. They needed justification to destroy my lake, and this manufactured risk was their golden ticket. Victoria didn't want safety. She wanted that land. And this was how she planned to take it under the guise of public protection. I wasn't going to let a sloppy fabrication decide the fate of my sanctuary. So I did what I do best. I fought back with facts. I dug into regional rainfall data spanning decades, overlaying it with elevation maps and seepage charts. I created real models that proved my lake didn't cause floods. It prevented them. Its sponge-like ecosystem absorbed peak rainfall, slowed runoff, and recharged the groundwater table. Without it, water would rush downstream straight toward the HOA's prized properties. I compiled a 76-page rebuttal filled with diagrams, citations, and simulations. I presented it at the next HOA meeting, standing before a long table of stone-faced board members. When I finished, there was silence. Then Victoria smiled that tight rehearsed smile and said, "Thank you for your input, Mr. Jenkins, but our experts disagree. The board has already voted." Just like that, science was dismissed, and my lake was sentenced to die. What followed wasn't development. It was a campaign. Victoria launched a full-blown PR blitz dressing the lake's destruction as progress. She called it Phase 2 of Willow Creek's modernization, holding outdoor presentations with lemonade stands and string lights. There were glossy brochures, renderings of smiling families parking their SUVs under decorative lanterns where bass and herons once thrived. She didn't just ignore my rebuttal, she erased it. At every meeting, she framed me as the problem, the lone holdout, the reclusive man clinging to a swamp. She told residents I was selfish, blocking growth, threatening safety, undermining community. Some neighbors believed her. Others, like Mrs. Greaves, looked away, too afraid or too tired to fight. The vote passed. The permits were signed, and in 30 days, the pumps would arrive. I stood at the edge of my dock watching the last light ripple across the water. I whispered, "They have no idea what they've started." They came at dawn. Trucks rolled in with a mechanical growl that rattled my windows. Excavators parked along the HOA easement like vultures circling a dying animal. Pumps as thick as tree trunks uncoiled across my land like black serpents, their mouths pointed at the heart of the lake. I rushed out with deed in hand, voice calm but shaking, demanding they stop. The foreman shrugged. "Talk to the HOA, sir. We're just following orders." Victoria watched from her silver Lexus AC, humming, not even bothering to step out. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the roar of water being ripped from its home. My lake bled away inch by inch, its mirror surface collapsing into sludge. Fish flopped helplessly in shrinking puddles. Herons screamed overhead. Trees that once kissed the waterline stood bare-rooted and trembling. It wasn't progress. It was execution. And I was forced to watch every second. In less than 72 hours, they reduced paradise to a scar. The last drops of spring water vanished into a storm drain system never meant for such volume. What remained was a muddy basin, lifeless, pungent, hollow. The oaks and maples that had rimmed the lake like quiet sentinels were labeled obstructions. Chainsaws screamed, roots tore, and one by one they fell. Massive machines scraped the earth clean, smothering it in layers of gravel and concrete filler. Hot asphalt arrived on the fourth day, steaming black oppressive. It spread like rot across a wound. They flattened it, striped it, and called it Willow Creek Plaza. Victoria posed for photos, beaming beside a plaque with her name etched into bronze. I stood behind the glass of my kitchen window, silent. Grief had turned to something colder, sharper. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't throw a stone, but I started drawing maps. Water is a patient architect. It doesn't rage, it remembers. And as Victoria paved over a century-old watershed, she ignored the most fundamental truth of hydrology. Displacement always demands direction. So, while they admired their new parking lines, I pored over topographic maps from the 1950s. Before development, before culverts, before HOA committees in pastel blazers, I traced ancient drainage paths, the soft channels where water had once flowed freely through my land, through theirs, down into the belly of Willow Creek. They thought they had conquered nature, but all they had done was reroute it poorly. Their impervious asphalt slab acted like a shield, forcing stormwater sideways instead of downward. Downhill, of course, lay the heart of Willow Creek Estates, including Victoria's designer lawn, her finished basement, and those pristine stone walkways she bragged about in the newsletter. I didn't have to invent anything. I just had to help the water remember. I wasn't interested in sabotage, no illegal pipes, no midnight excavations. I wanted something cleaner, smarter. I wanted physics to speak louder than fury. So I began restoring the forgotten contours of my land, old swales, barely visible depressions where rainwater had once meandered gently toward lower ground. I cleared brush-adjusted slopes, but made no drastic changes. Every cut of the shovel was legal. Then came the rain gardens. I planted native species sedge goldenrod iris along my boundary with the new parking lot. Each one designed to absorb water until it couldn't. Because I knew something Victoria didn't, a 2-acre asphalt slab collects tens of thousands of gallons in a storm, and when it floods, it spills always downhill. So I didn't redirect anything. I just built a path of least resistance, in the direction nature once chose. The system was passive. But the outcome, it would be persuasive. It began with whispers just like her campaign. Neighbors mentioned musty smells in their basements, strange damp spots creeping up the drywall. At first, they blamed it on aging pipes or bad sump pumps. But I knew better. I watched from my porch as the first autumn rains rolled in. Not a downpour, just steady, relentless drizzle, exactly the kind that used to soak peacefully into my lake bed. Now it gathered on the blacktop, slick and aimless. The rain gardens swelled, held firm, until they couldn't. Water spilled over gently right into the regraded channels I'd prepared. Not artificial, not forced, just guided. Down it went, finding the contours Victoria never acknowledged. I saw her once standing on her porch with an umbrella staring at the pooling water edging toward her lawn. She didn't speak, but her eyes searched the pavement like it had betrayed her, and in a way it had. By the third week of rain, the whispers became complaints. Victoria's immaculate front yard, once rigidly trimmed and spotlighted at night, was turning spongy. The soil, deprived of its natural drainage partner, began to rebel. Patches of grass yellowed. Her prize rose bushes wilted, drowning silently in oversaturated roots. She called landscapers, sprinkler technicians, even a plumber. No one gave her the answer she wanted, because no pipe was broken, no timer misfired. It was the water table, and it was rising. Meanwhile, neighbors downstream discovered puddles in basements they once bragged were dry as Arizona. Still, Victoria insisted it was coincidence weather anomalies, poor home maintenance. But I saw the stiffness in her walk. The way she stepped around the edge of her driveway like it might swallow her. She didn't realize it yet, but the war she started with concrete. She was losing inch by inch to the ground beneath it. I didn't yell, didn't storm the HOA board, didn't file lawsuits or chain myself to a tree. That wasn't my style. Instead, I walked the perimeter of my land with a surveyor's eye and a soldier's memory. Every contour, every dip and slope, every long-forgotten swale tucked beneath leaves, I mapped it. Because water-like truth needs only the path of least resistance. And Victoria had just built a 2-acre slab of impermeable arrogance next to mine. No drainage system, no retention plan, just blacktop and bravado. So I designed my response with precision, not revenge. Hydrology. I cleared the old drainage paths, deepened the channels just slightly, built rain gardens along the fence line, planted native sedges not for beauty, but for balance. It all looked peaceful, intentional, legal, and it was. Because I wasn't breaking the law, I was obeying nature's laws, and nature was no longer patient. What I created looked harmless, picturesque even. A few shallow trenches winding through wildflower beds, rain gardens framed by stone borders and native grasses. To the untrained eye, it was landscaping. To me, it was infrastructure. Each trench angled with purpose. Each garden placed not for aesthetic, but for absorption redirection and, when needed, overflow. Because when 2 acres of asphalt begin to shed water, it must go somewhere. Victoria hadn't accounted for that. Her precious parking lot was graded to push runoff, straight to my property line. Previously, the lake would have absorbed it. Now, I would. To a point. After that, gravity would take over, and the old drainage channels, long dormant but never dead, would carry the excess, downhill, through the forgotten creases of this land, right into the heart of Willow Creek Estates. I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was simply preparing the ground to remember what it had always known. It came quietly, not a storm, but a steady, unrelenting soak that lasted for days. The kind of rain that didn't crash down but crept in soaking roots, saturating soil, testing every contour. At first, the neighborhood held. Lawns darkened, gutters whispered, kids stomped puddles. Then the parking lot changed. Water pooled in places it wasn't designed to. The southern edge closest to my land became a mirror shallow but wide, and when it spilled over, it did so exactly as I had planned. The rain gardens took the first hit. They drank deep. But by the second night, they overflowed gently, gracefully into the restored swales. Water followed the path I had drawn, not with force, but inevitability. And further downhill past the rows of homes that once ignored me, crawl spaces began to sweat. Basements groaned. And Victoria, she hadn't noticed. Not yet. But the water had begun to speak. By morning, the questions started. Not loud, not panicked, just whispers beneath umbrellas and murmurs over mailbox clusters. "Did your sump pump kick on last night? I've never seen puddles there before." No one mentioned the lake. Not yet. Victoria, dressed in her usual pressed white blouse and pastel blazer, was still making rounds, smiling, nodding, deflecting. But I saw it the way her eyes lingered too long on her lawn's sunken corner, the way she stepped around a puddle forming near her porch, muttering something about clogged gutters. She didn't know, no one did, that the water rising beneath them wasn't an accident. It was memory, the land remembering what had been stolen, the ground reclaiming its right. I kept to myself, trimming a hedge, pretending not to notice the soggy footprints in the mulch. But every inch of standing water was a message, and Victoria was starting to read it. By week's end, the rain had stopped, but the problems didn't. Lawns once springy turned sponge soft. Basement dehumidifiers hummed endlessly. Children weren't allowed to play outside, not because of the weather, but because the yards had become too soggy to walk without sinking. Victoria scheduled a seasonal landscape assessment. She blamed excess irrigation, then faulty storm drains, then finally natural settling. But natural settling doesn't bubble water through driveway cracks, it doesn't warp brand-new hardwood floors, and it certainly doesn't cause standing puddles in second-story closets. Still, she clung to her narrative, insisting the HOA's decisions were visionary and long-term. Behind her, the asphalt of the parking lot shimmered with thin films of stagnant water reflecting not clouds but consequences. I watched quietly as workers attempted to jet clean drains never built to handle redirected flow. It was subtle, yes, but inevitable. Victoria wasn't drowning yet, but the ground beneath her was starting to whisper. The HOA newsletter arrived that Monday, full color, overly cheerful. Community Spotlight, a modern parking solution, it declared. Photos of the lot shimmered beneath a bold headline. Victoria stood beside a silver Escalade smiling like a senator at a ribbon cutting. But the image didn't show the shallow puddles pooling around the car's wheels, or the subtle ripple in the asphalt behind her. It didn't mention the contractor's return visit, or the surveyor quietly examining elevation shifts near Lot 7, nor the neighbor who'd begun using sandbags around his patio. Instead, it asked residents to be patient during this period of unprecedented weather. Unprecedented. That word showed up a lot. It was easier to blame the skies than admit the ground itself had been rewritten. And I clipped that newsletter, folded it carefully, and slid it into a file marked Evidence. Because I knew nature wasn't finished. It was only warming up. It started as a shimmer, nothing more than a wide, slick sheen behind Victoria's backyard pergola. But by the end of the week, that shimmer had a shoreline. The decorative gravel pathway sunk an inch deep in standing water. The roses gone. The mulch bed floated like driftwood. Neighbors began noticing, though no one said her name aloud. They spoke in phrases like low spot issues and water creeping uphill. Except water never creeps uphill. It returns to where it once belonged. And this water, it remembered. Victoria tried to cover it up literally. She brought in topsoil, rolled sod, even ordered custom French drains. But it was like putting a bandage on a sinking ship. Every fix bled into the next failure. And then came the frogs. One night, croaking loud, relentless echoed across her yard. The irony was delicious. The very sounds she once filed complaints over had followed her home. This time, they weren't leaving. Victoria didn't retreat. She escalated. She hired a landscaper, a drainage consultant, and an influencer-style photographer to document her eco-conscious backyard transformation. Glossy HOA newsletters showed smiling children on tricycles beside flower beds she'd placed over soggy earth. But behind the lens, the ground told another story. Drainage tiles collapsed. The sod browned. Mosquitoes bred in puddles that refused to dry. She called them temporary seasonal fluctuations. Residents began murmuring. One by one, driveways cracked. Basements smelled of mildew. Still, Victoria doubled down. During an HOA Q&A livestream, she called the flooding a community-wide adjustment and blamed a historic wet season. In the comments, Mrs. Gable simply typed, "The lake never flooded us." No caps, no anger, just fact. Victoria didn't respond. She ended the stream early. Because no matter how many filters she applied, water had started speaking louder than spin. And it was pooling where her pride used to stand. It happened on a Tuesday. Quiet, like everything else that mattered in this story. The storm wasn't catastrophic, just steady. Long. Heavy. By midnight, the drains at Willow Creek Commons were overwhelmed. Water collected where the lake once breathed, but now there was no depth, no soil to hold it, only compressed gravel and fresh asphalt. The lot buckled. Hairline cracks split into veins, then fractures. Painted stripes disappeared under inches of water. Cars floated. Not entirely, but enough for tires to lose grip and for headlights to reflect off the black surface like ripples in a dying pond. Residents woke to find their vehicles soaked. Some waded barefoot cursing. Others filmed the scene in stunned silence. The HOA hotline rang nonstop. But Victoria, she didn't appear. Her Escalade was parked elsewhere on higher ground, and in that moment the community finally saw it. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was engineered failure, and someone had drawn the blueprints. By morning, the HOA clubhouse was packed. Not for yoga or a barbecue, but an emergency meeting. The mood wasn't frustration. It was fear. Residents whispered in corners, clutching phone photos of flooded basements, warped flooring, soaked insulation. Some had insurance. Most didn't. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, dressed like nothing was wrong, clutching a tablet and wearing a smile 2 seconds from cracking. She called the flooding unexpected, blamed storm anomalies and insisted everything was under assessment. Then came the questions. How did this happen? Why weren't we warned? Wasn't the lake supposed to absorb this kind of rainfall? Someone asked about my name. She dodged. Someone else mentioned the original hydrology report she ignored. Her smile faltered. And when the projector flickered to life, showing drone footage of water streaming from the parking lot, overrun drains, and backyard flooding, the room turned cold. Not because of the rain outside, but because they finally realized they'd been led into disaster. The shift wasn't loud. It was subtle, like the creak of a house settling before collapse. One by one, voices rose not in anger, but with pointed clarity. An older man asked for copies of the original environmental assessment. Another woman demanded to know why no secondary drainage was installed. A young couple at the back, first-time homeowners, quietly asked if the board had considered the long-term effects of paving over a wetland. Victoria answered, but her words were slower now, thinner. Her practiced tone cracked under the weight of specifics. And then came the line that broke the room. Why did you ignore the hydrologist? She froze. No answer. No spin. Just silence. Because no one had forgotten my presentation months ago, the one she dismissed without a question. Now, those same slides were being reprinted, passed hand to hand like evidence. Justice wasn't coming like a hammer. It was arriving like rising water, steady, unrelenting, and undeniable. By the next meeting, I wasn't just invited, I was requested. Not with hostility, but with quiet urgency. Not to argue, but to explain. I brought a single folder. No drama, no theatrics, just facts. I walked them through the soil layers beneath the parking lot, clay-heavy, slow draining, and sealed tight by fresh asphalt. I showed how the lake had acted as a natural pressure valve, storing and slowly releasing stormwater. I played footage from my property rain gardens, calmly swelling bioswales guiding excess runoff away. Then I showed where that runoff had to go once the lake was erased and how gravity doesn't negotiate. No blame, just science. The room was silent, even Victoria, especially Victoria. Her carefully built version of the truth had collapsed under its own weight. Because you can ignore a man, you can dismiss a report, but you can't argue with water when it begins to speak for itself. The board didn't vote that night. They didn't have to. Victoria didn't return for questions. She left the clubhouse early, her steps, sharp shoulders tight, eyes forward. Her Escalade, once spotless, now bore a permanent ring of dried mud around its wheels. The next morning, a letter circulated, anonymous but detailed. It outlined ignored reports, emails between Victoria and the engineering firm she handpicked, and internal HOA memos admitting the lake's destruction may cause minor runoff rebalancing. Within 48 hours, a petition for leadership reevaluation gained enough signatures. At the emergency session that followed, Victoria stood before the community. Her voice cracked once. She blamed miscommunication consultant, oversight, and unexpected climate shifts. But no one nodded this time, and when someone finally asked, "Do you still believe draining the lake was the right decision?" she didn't answer. She just stepped down. And in that silence, the neighborhood finally heard the truth it had ignored too long. With Victoria gone, the board scrambled to stabilize the fallout figuratively and literally. Engineers were brought in, real ones this time. Their verdict was blunt. The parking lot would need partial removal. French drains, deep soil remediation, and new stormwater management systems would cost hundreds of thousands. Special assessments were proposed. Some residents threatened lawsuits. Others quietly put their homes up for sale. And amid the chaos, my land stood unchanged, dry green, humming with frogs and dragonflies. People began to knock on my door again, not with complaints but with questions, curiosity, apologies. A few even asked if I'd help redesign a new sustainable system. I didn't gloat, I didn't scold, I just listened, then nodded, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. This was about restoring what mattered and showing in the quietest way possible that nature isn't something to conquer. It's something we must learn to live with or answer to. I never rebuilt the lake, not entirely. What once was a deep spring-fed sanctuary couldn't be resurrected with shovels alone. But I shaped the land with intention. I carved out 3 smaller ponds connected by winding bioswales lined with stone and native plants. Water returned slowly. The springs hadn't died, they had only been silenced. Now they whispered again. Birds nested. Frogs sang. Children from the neighborhood began visiting, wide-eyed, pointing at tadpoles, listening to the soft rustle of cattails in the wind. No one talked about lawsuits anymore, or parking spots. People just stood quietly watching the water shimmer at sunset gold and soft like memory. And Victoria. She moved out of state, sold her home at a loss. The new owners tore out the roses and planted native ground cover. No signs, no fences, just openness. I never said I told you so. I didn't need to. The land was already speaking loud enough for both of us. This wasn't just about a lake, or a parking lot, or even an HOA gone too far. It was about what happens when we forget that nature has its own rules, its own memory, its own quiet power. You can pave over truth, you can silence warnings, but eventually what you bury finds its way back. And sometimes justice doesn't roar. It trickles, it rises, it waits. If you've ever felt powerless, unheard, or erased, remember you're not alone. And sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean shouting louder. It means listening deeper and letting the truth do the speaking. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more, and tag a friend who might need to hear it. Maybe they've lost something too. Maybe it's time they reclaimed it. Because no one has the right to drain your lake, not without consequence, not without a fight. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next story.